For more, we are joined by Jamsheed Choksy. He's a distinguished professor of Indiana University Bloomington who teaches Iranian and Central Eurasian Studies. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor. So firstly, I just want to get your reaction to the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire after the first direct talks in 30 years. Can it realistically hold while Israeli troops remain on the Lebanese soil?
That is an interesting question, and it remains to be seen. In the past, such truces have not held. So we should also keep in mind that in reality, this is an agreement between Israel and Hezbollah, even more than between Israel and the Lebanese government, because there is no actual combat occurring between the Israeli government and the Lebanese government. So the players are Hezbollah, who is an Iranian proxy, and the state of Israel. And each side, even in this agreement, has retained the right to strike or retaliate if they feel the truce is being broken. So it is very tentative. It is for 10 days. And we will also have to see whether President Trump really follows through on having both sides come to the White House. That actually, if it does occur, would be quite unique, because we'd have to see whether it's really between Israel and Hezbollah in the White House or Israel and the Lebanese government, with Hezbollah in the background.
Okay, Professor, we'll come back to that possible White House meeting later, but I want to go back to a question that has come up quite a few times in the past days, past week, and that's, what President Trump has been saying to Bibi Netanyahu. So the question is, does Israel really want this truce, or is it President Trump saying, you got to do it? Because we know that Israel's primary goal, it's said that many times, is to neutralize Hezbollah as a military threat. And that would suggest this ceasefire is potentially very, very temporary.
Indeed. And as we know, Iran, as part of its ceasefire agreement with the United States, the 14-day ceasefire, Iran had insisted that there also be ceasefires with Iran's proxies, Hezbollah being the number one. The Houthis would be the next, probably in line. And so, yes, it would appear that perhaps the pressure on Israel and on the Lebanese government to then put pressure on Hezbollah did come from Washington.
Now, Professor, how do you think Hezbollah is likely to respond? I mean, the group appears non-committal at this point, with an official saying it will only abide by a ceasefire if all attacks in Lebanon stop.
Indeed, and that's why it is so tentative. And it could also be ignited by any ignition of a further conflict between Iran and the United States, or between Iran and Israel. So all this is very conditional. The US-Iran negotiations, the Israeli Hezbollah Lebanese negotiations, all very tentative. And of course, in the background to all this is the whole issue of petrochemicals.
Professor, I want to go back to the point you were making about how much of a milestone it would be if talks do indeed take place between Bibi Netanyahu and the leaders of Lebanon at the White House. I'm wondering, what kind of significance it will have, how historic it might be, given that the two countries literally have no diplomatic ties and are still technically at war. And a meeting between the Prime Minister of Israel and perhaps with Nawaf Salam and Joseph Aoun, I mean, that sounds like a big deal.
That would be a very big deal. An even bigger deal is that if there was ever any meeting between the Israeli government and Hezbollah leaders themselves, particularly given the recent history where Israel has essentially decapitated much of the Hezbollah leadership. But let us also keep in mind that such a meeting may not be as far-fetched as we may have thought of previously. Just recently, in Pakistan, the Vice President of the United States met with the leadership of Iran, including Iran's Speaker of Parliament, something that was essentially, shall we say, inconceivable just a few months ago.
So if this truce holds until the April 22nd deadline, Professor, how much diplomatic oxygen or space does it provide for the U.S.-Iran talks in Islamabad?
I think that that's the key. All this, whether the Houthis refrain from attacking the Gulf of Aden, whether Hezbollah hesitates from firing at Israel, Israel hesitates at firing at Hezbollah. Let's keep in mind that Israeli troops are not going to be withdrawing from southern Lebanon. They are staying there. So if all that holds, then we do have further space for additional rounds of negotiations on the key issue, and namely the main players, the United States, Israel, and Iran. And that, shall we say, that negotiation is the linchpin for all the rest.
And Professor, I just want to take this forward, if I may. If for example, if no agreement is reached, in this upcoming round of U.S.-Iran talks, I'm wondering, do you see a pattern? Are you expecting full-scale hostilities to resume, or do you see this, I call it a dance of ceasefire extensions going on until some sort of an agreeable deal can be found between all three sides?
Under ordinary circumstances, I would say that what you referred to, the dance of ceasefires, continuing with occasional hostilities and then ceasefires being resumed, with global pressure mounting to resolve the issue. Let's keep in mind, when we talk about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, we really are talking about Iran saying that it would fire upon with missiles and drones and the use of mines, that it would attack oil transportation and natural gas transportation passing eastwards out to the Strait of Hormuz. So that's the main threat, and that is very difficult to curtail. We also now have the United States positioned outside in the Gulf of Oman to intercept any ships carrying chemicals or munitions to Iran. So both sides are sort of, shall we say, the trigger is ready to be pulled. The question will be, one, how much pressure from other countries on the United States, on Israel, on Iran to resolve this. But if it doesn't resolve, then I think we could see very well the resumption of hostilities. How long they will continue is unclear, but they certainly could resume. And let us keep one additional factor in mind, and that a lot of this is going to come down to shall we say, three leaderships. The Iranian leadership, which right now is, shall we say, shattered and scattered. And so there's no one individual like the late supreme leader to make the decision. In the United States, it is going to come down ultimately to President Trump. And in Israel, it is going to come very much down to Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Okay, so speaking of President Trump, Professor, he has projected optimism about striking that deal with Iran. At this stage, does he still prioritize securing an agreement that matches or exceeds the JCPOA, or is any deal that can be presented as a political win now sufficient?
I think it will be very difficult for him to present a deal to the American public that is less than what the JCPOA was. But however, let's also keep in mind, at this point, most of the provisions of the JCPOA have expired. Despite the United States leaving the agreement, if it had continued, most of those provisions have now expired. The others are going to sunset pretty soon. So in some sense, any deal he could get, he might be able to sell. What we do know at present is Iran has offered a 5-year moratorium on nuclear activities. President Trump wants 20. They could very well end up settling somewhere in between. But at this point, that's only one issue. Iran has added a demand that Iran control the Strait of Hormuz, which would be unacceptable under international law, under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. It would be unacceptable to the other countries of the Persian Gulf region. And frankly, it should be unacceptable to any other country because, shall we say, global pathways cannot be controlled by any one nation.
Indeed, Professor. Okay, thank you very much for your time. We'll have to leave it there for now. Professor Choksy. We've been speaking to Jamsheed Choksy, a distinguished professor of Indiana University Bloomington. Thank you.